panel on how. We have a group of speakers who are going to take us on a tour of mixed reality, simulations, computer vision, and many other wonders. So I'd like to begin by inviting Harold Haraldson to take the stage. Harold's the director of the XR Collaboratory and a lecturer on augmented and virtual reality at Cornell Tech. At the XR Collaboratory, he works with Cornell faculty, researchers, and students from a variety of disciplines on XR-related projects. Harold holds a master's degree in computer engineering from Tokyo Institute of Technology. Over to you.
Great. Thank you, Anthony. Let me set my stopwatch on. Timing. Good. All right. Thanks, Sharon, and everyone who put this together. Very excited to be here. So as Anthony said, I'm the director of the XR Collaboratory, and I also teach 2 courses in our New York City campus to our graduate students on the topic of AR and VR. So for today, the big question is, will XR really help us to make cities a better place? Now, I'm biased, but I really hope so. And I think it will be our students who will actually make that happen down the road. And we can perhaps increase the likelihood of that happening by giving them the right type of education for designing these products and these experiences. And this is a little bit different than designing for mobile devices, designing for other technologies used to present information. And that's kind of the objective with my talk, is to go through the challenges and perhaps the opportunities as well. Now, the title of this talk, XR Interaction Design and Urban Tech, this essentially presents 3 separate topics. So we have XR, we have interaction design, and we have urban tech. And before going on, I think it's a good idea to really go quickly through the definitions of these 3. So for XR, you might, Anthony used mixed reality. We use XR, we use AR, we use VR. It's all over the place. I think we're all aware of that. But a good way to start is actually to look at Milgram's virtuality continuum. This was published back in the 90s. And essentially, this gives us this spectrum. At the 2 extreme ends, we have reality and we have virtual reality. The components that come in between are those that mix together reality and fully virtual environments. So inside there, you have augmented reality and the lesser known augmented virtuality. So for augmented reality, we have primarily the scene built of real information and then augmented with virtual content. Augmented virtuality is the opposite. And then for virtual reality, obviously, we're fully virtual with no content being pulled in from the real world. Mixed reality in academia is usually defined as the space that uses augmented reality or augmented virtuality. Essentially, as the name implies, mixes together reality and virtual reality. This can be confusing because we see in industry and mainstream media mixed reality being used for many different concepts, but this is how we approach this. And finally, extended reality or XR, which is what we're using here today. XR essentially is an umbrella term we use when talking about anything going from augmented reality to and including virtual reality. So just to clear up the confusion that we might have here in the audience, I usually start with a slide like this every single time. All right, and then we get to our next component, which is interaction design. And there are many people here in the audience, professionals in this field, and we know that we have many different definitions. The one that I'm presenting here today is taken from Don Norman's book, The Design of Everyday Things. And there it states that the focus is upon how people interact with technology when we're talking about interaction design. And in our case, technology is XR technology. And the goal in interaction design is to enhance how people or your user understand what can be done with that technology. So using signifiers, using affordances, and then we use feedback to tell our user what is happening or what has just happened. So feedback, obviously, very important in any type of human-computer interaction. And then just finally, just to emphasize that interaction design is a very interdisciplinary field where you pull all this stuff together to create a positive, enjoyable experience for your end user. Now, what is urban tech? So this is not my expertise. So what I'm using here exactly is just something that I pulled from our friends at the Urban Tech Hub at Cornell Tech. So let's take a look. Urban tech is a new field of study. It's an emerging sector of technology that includes innovations that make cities more connected, livable, efficient, and accessible. And this applies to people as well as businesses. So pulling all this together, this talk is about essentially designing how people interact with XR technology that makes cities more connected, livable, efficient, and accessible. But the question here is, does XR actually have a role to play in urban tech? Is it a gimmick? Is it going to be a valuable component in achieving our goals? Again, when I look at urban tech, I see an application area. And in my job, we work inside of multiple application areas. It could be health tech, it could be urban tech, it could be architecture. And usually when we do this, we prefer to work with domain experts. When preparing this talk, I recall 3 examples that I want to go through here that kind of combine XR and urban tech in my mind, but I welcome all the urban tech professionals to call me out and bring that up in the Q&A and the panel discussion. The first one that I remember was this blog post from 2008 by Dan Hill. And what you see here is on the left is using data visualization to show energy consumption at the neighborhood level, right? On the right, you see a similar approach, but this is at the apartment level, showing the energy consumption by individual appliances. The idea here is that by presenting the energy consumption, you can actually modify the user's behavior and encourage them to use less energy. So this might be something towards making cities more efficient. Another thing that I vaguely remembered and managed to pull up was this report from roop in 2011. And if you flip through it, it mentions augmented reality in a few places. On the cover, there's a handheld device kind of hinting at an AR experience. And then throughout the report, you have these use cases of how to make things more accessible by giving real-time information back to the citizens. So whether this is transportation data and so on. You can obviously see the connection here that XR could have with these kinds of use cases by having displays embedded into, let's say, headsets or handheld devices. The third example that I'm bringing up here is quite different, and this is more of a design fiction. I wouldn't be surprised if you've seen this mentioned already today. I think this is the standard example of a dystopian XR use case in the urban environment. This is a short film by Keiichi Matsuda, and I'm not sure this is a good example of a livable or efficient or accessible urban living, but it's certainly a connected one. So I wanted to throw these examples out there, and we can use these perhaps as talking points during the panel. Going forward, for the rest of my talk, I want to limit the scope to augmented reality. I want to focus on that when we look at the interaction design challenges, because AR and VR, although they have a lot of things in common, they're also very different. Um, there are several dimensions that you have to consider when designing for AR. There is what we call the method of augmentation. So here you can see the method of augmentation for visual displays. And I want to emphasize, I say visual displays because augmented reality can take place for other senses than the visual one. You can have audio, you can have smell, taste, and haptic as well. But for visual displays, you have the optical see-through augmentation, video see-through, and spatial projection. These are very different approaches to create an augmented reality experience. And then another axis would be where you place this display. You can have it as a head-mounted display, a handheld display, or a stationary display. Now, I want to emphasize here that you can have an optical see-through stationary display. You can have a video see-through head-mounted display. So you can kind of mix and match across these dimensions. But it's fair to say that looking forward, looking at the next couple of years, we are going to be seeing optical see-through head-mounted displays as the primary channel for AR experiences. Now the challenges, significant challenges. Let's start with technical. So we have tracking, we have rendering, and we have hardware challenges. So tracking obviously is about estimating the pose of the headset, and also in many cases, tracking other objects, other items, body parts. In a lot of the newer devices, there are no input devices. So we're relying on hand tracking, eye tracking, and so on. So computer vision is a significant fundamental discipline for XR. Rendering, graphics, obviously, how to render things quickly and efficiently. This includes using predictive technology, so how to try to predict the movement, so to minimize lag of virtual content. And then hardware. You can see here this device. This is the HoloLens 2. You can just imagine the technical challenges here for putting all of these sensors, these cameras, these displays together in this energy-constrained device. Now, let's look at interaction challenges. And here we have selection and manipulation, how to select and manipulate virtual objects in AR. This is different than how we interact with virtual content on our desktops or on our touch displays. System control is also something that is frequently overlooked by designers coming into this field. How do we create menus? How do we input text? How do we input any kind of symbolic input into this kind of system? And also, obviously, ergonomics. We want the sessions not to be too not to be too tiring for the user. So we don't want them to raise their hands all the time. And prototyping. Prototyping is still difficult to do in this field, especially for designers that are coming in with a limited coding background. This is changing a little bit in the last couple of years, but you still would have to start coding and start working with game engines if you want to create sophisticated interaction experiences. And then evaluating 3D interactions is quite different from 2D interactions, and this requires a specific attention. And I guess this brings us to the teaching part. So how do we actually enable and inspire the next generation of urban tech professionals? So this is essentially, how do we educate our students who are interested in this field to create products and services that use XR? Let's assume that XR is actually useful to make cities more connected, livable, efficient, and accessible. Now, I have a very high level view of potential syllabus modules. As I said, I teach two courses, very different courses, fall and spring semester. We could say that a high level view, the minimal high level view of a course would be input, output, and interaction. you want to go into a more detailed view, you want to start with a history component. You want to provide your students with a perspective. XR didn't start when Mark Zuckerberg bought Oculus. It started back in the 60s. So there's a long history of ups and downs throughout the decades. Very interesting, and this is something that our students need to know. 3D math is required, but again, you can tweak this depending on what type of students you are teaching to. If they have CS math background, you can go a little bit deeper into this. Human perception is very important. This is again different from 2D interaction design. You need to know about depth perception, vestibular senses for VR and locomotion, and so on. Visual rendering or graphics. This is just pure graphics pipeline, rendering, shaders, and so on. Tracking, this would be like a sprinkle of computer vision you add to your course. Again, you can change the weight share to make it fit to your audience. Input devices are you using controllers like this? Are you using hand tracking, eye tracking, and so on? Output devices is about the actual displays and display technology. 3D interaction techniques, I more or less have a full course on this. So this is about what I mentioned in the challenges about selection, manipulation, system control, and so on. Game design is another component that is actually useful here to teach. And again, evaluation. You want, especially if you're doing a research-driven course, you want to train your students in how to evaluate the experience before releasing it to the general public. And then additional modules would be development and focus on specific application areas. So if you're focusing on urban tech students, you could obviously bring on more urban tech. Development is something that we have to provide because not many students are familiar with, let's say, game engines or coding. So, but we are more focusing on theory here. All right, so I think I'm a minute or so over time, so let's just wrap this up. Conclusion, this quote never fails. The best way to predict the future is to invent it. We're hoping that XR will be useful in the future, and I'm a big believer in that. I'm biased, obviously, but a better way to put this is actually the best way to predict the future is to enable our students to invent it and design this kind of syllabus supported by other courses on machine learning, computer vision, and so on. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Harold. I just want to remind everybody, if you have questions or comments, feel free to go ahead and drop those into the chat, and I will collect them and bring them out at the end of the session for discussion. So next up, we have Wendy Ju, who I believe has already been introduced. I'll just recap for anyone that's joining us. Wendy Ju is an associate professor at the Jacobs Technion Cornell Institute at Cornell Tech. And in the information science field at Cornell University. She's also on the faculty at the Technion Israel Institute of Technology, and her research explores how people will interact with future automated systems such as cars, robots, and cities. Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you. So I'm going to share screen. See how this goes. Do let me know if anything doesn't show up. So I really appreciate Harold kind of kicking off, explaining a lot of the technologies. I'm a associate professor in information science, and my background is actually in mechanical engineering. I look at how people interact with machines and automation, and a lot of it is about design, which has a future orientation. We're thinking about how we want to make machines so they actually work better for people and society. And one of the things that's really interesting and a challenge is that when we do, when we collect data and we're gathering information, the data is usually about the present or the past. And when we design for the future, we don't have the information we need sometimes that we need in order to design for what future scenarios are going to be. And so a lot of people who are in technology kind of use this as an excuse just to head in and do whatever they want because you can't have data about the future. And a lot of the research that we're trying to do is really kind of about getting information, gathering empirical data about possible future scenarios so we can actually design futures that are actually suited to people and how people want things to happen. And so one particular project I really want to focus on is this project on looking at how autonomous vehicles drive, the driving style that we're giving to autonomous vehicles, just to kind of showcase that general method. In the background of this picture is actually a shot from our driving simulation lab. Had we been able to meet in non-pandemic times, I would have been dragging everyone in for like little demos of this, either unofficially in break, or maybe we could have just done our whole talk there. But we have a car, and then we have 3 screens, and we have a 3D environment that we have people drive through. So this whole thing is really like a theater to understand how one person is really going to behave in a car. And we use this to test out like different interfaces or different driving techniques to think about how we actually want to design autonomous vehicles. I'm just going to show just this clip, and I'll talk over it. Hopefully the sound won't play. This is actually something I'm really well known for, which is this field study I did when I was a research scientist at Stanford University. And we were looking to understand how people outside the car are going to interact with autonomous cars. And that's really difficult to do as a real experiment because there's just not so many autonomous cars to experiment with. And so we actually had a person dressed in a car seat costume. So we could actually have a fake autonomous car that we could then use to drive on the road and look at how pedestrians around the autonomous car interact with the car. This is also better than an actual autonomous car because you can try things that wouldn't be safe to try with an autonomous car. So the car is also in costume. It like has stickers that say Stanford autonomous vehicle. And then so you can actually see, like in this case, this person like started to cross, but because the vehicle eased into the crosswalk little, he decides to go around. And even as he's making that maneuver, he's looking around to see if anyone else is confused, and lots of other people cross in front of the car. Here, I think this is interesting. This woman actually is trying to like not cross unless that vehicle's crossing. So we actually have to do a little feinting to get to force an interaction. And she like looks at and waves at the car, but then actually stops on the other side to like turn around and look to see what the car does. So, I mean, I think people have some awareness that what they're doing is signaling. And so they actually don't stop in the middle of the road. They wait till they cross to like try to figure out what's going on. You also notice that people kind of like go from just walking to performing walking, so they feel safe. One of the things that this research points out is that people don't do what they all swear up and down that they do, which is look at the eyes, make eye contact with the driver of the car before they decide to cross. We did the study for a week and like nobody made eye contact because it was none to make eye contact with. But, most of the people went ahead and crossed in front of the car anyway. Many of the people didn't even notice that there wasn't a driver to look at because that's how much they weren't looking at, the driver. They're looking at the front bumper or the wheel. And walking on the street is such an automatic process that when we stop people afterwards to interview them, most of them didn't remember that they encountered a car at all. This, as crazy as it was, as a protocol, is the predominant way that people are actually going around like studying how pedestrians outside of the car are going to interact with autonomous vehicles, including like this great experiment. Ford and Domino's did a partnership where they experimented with how people are going to do pizza delivery with autonomous vehicles, and they actually, had this fake autonomous car that like then it worked out some sort of mechanism by which you could pick up a pizza. And I particularly like that example because John Schutko from Ford, when he first saw the videos that we showed him of this research, told me that was the stupidest thing he's ever seen in his life. And the next thing you know, he's doing my protocol because there's actually just not so many ways that we can actually buy a little piece of the future, understand how people are going to interact with the future technology without implementing that technology. So in this research I'd like to show you now, we're going to focus on the question of interaction with automation by thinking about it as a cross-cultural problem. I was really inspired to do this by this statement that Rafi Krikorian at Uber ATC, which doesn't exist anymore, by the way, made. He said, if our autonomous car can drive in Pittsburgh, we can drive anywhere. And I know what he was talking about is the fact that Pittsburgh has really terrible weather and poorly paved streets. But, you know, let's just ask this question, like, what do you mean anywhere? Like, this is Ireland. This is India. This is Israel. This is Tel Aviv. Driving is actually something that's incredibly different everywhere you go. And where we train the cars and how we train them actually speaks to only one specific kind of driving. And that can cause problems if we have a blind spot to the fact that driving is really different everywhere you go in the world. And this is really interesting because even where the self-driving cars are being designed, this is already an issue. This is articles from 2018, and this is when Waymo was running these self-driving car studies. And they actually, the title of this article is Why People Keep Rear-Ending Self-Driving Vehicles. These vehicles have fewer at-fault accidents than your actual human driver, but they have 10 times as many accidents if you don't look at the question of fault. So if I rear-end a person, I would definitely feel like I was at fault. But if I found out the person I rear-ended somehow, weirdly, was in 10 times as many rear-end accidents as someone else, you know, I would wonder if there was something wrong with them. And actually, you know, if you've driven around these vehicles, they just drive in a way that's really not in keeping with the way that everyone else on the road is driving. And so they get into a lot of these accidents. And these are low speed, you know, low damage accidents right now, but it's a problem. And more problematically, the tech companies basically have this attitude that as long as they're following the law, they're doing fine. California crash reports make clear that people expect the you know, other people driving to be bending or breaking the traffic rules or just like adapting the cultural norms, but the people who are designing the robots won't follow suit. And that's like an interesting conundrum. And I think as a result of that kind of thing, you actually see stories like these. This is a New York Times story article talking about how Arizonans were attacking self-driving cars with rocks and knives. And, you know, I think if you are actually not local, you might think that this is because people are very concerned about the status of gig workers, people who would otherwise, the humans that would otherwise be driving these cars, you know, truck drivers that might be out of work. But if you drive near these cars, you know, the reason why they are, you know, wielding rocks and knives is because the way these cars drives are like really infuriating. They drive too slowly, they stop weirdly, and they hold up traffic. So one thing that we can do is actually look at the ways that people are actually interacting with one another on the road through their vehicle motions and collect information about what it is that people are doing when they're driving cars. And maybe more importantly, look at how those things are the same or different in different places. This is actually stuff that you would think with all the cars we have in all these places in the world that we would actually know, but we don't. So what we have right now is a driving simulator setup where we have two people who are driving in the same virtual world, but each in their own virtual cars, kind of like Mario Kart. And we're trying to get to the point that we're able to have 4 people in the same world. And then we set up scenarios where those drivers basically encounter each other in the world. Sometimes they have to pass each other or merge, or they come to 4-way stops and have to figure out who's going to go first. And what we're looking at is the way that people implicitly and explicitly signal to one another to negotiate passage on the roadway. This is what it looks like when you're actually one of the participants in the driving simulator. We actually have a leap motion, so something that actually can model where your hands are in front of the VR goggles, so that when you put your hands on the toy game steering wheel, that the virtual hands that you see in your virtual world actually map to your existing hands. That and the fact that your view changes when you move your head around makes people really feel like they're in the world. And then this is a video that we have of this driving setup. I should mention this research is work that I'm doing in collaboration with Avi Perouche, who is at the Technion. We've done some pilot studies, and we're just about to receive NSF funding to run cross-cultural experiments in Israel, China, and the US. So one of the things that we're able to do, because we're doing everything in a virtual environment, is then instrument the environment so that we can replay like where people are in time, how they're moving their heads around, or how they're moving their hands around, whether they do any signaling, either by using turn signals or beeping or even gesturing with their hands. This is two people coming up to a four-way stop and then each trying to turn left. And then maybe I should address that title. So we're calling this project Strangeland, which is a reference to a sci-fi novel by Heinlein. Strangeland is the novel which this word grok comes from, where you kind of like just understand what someone else is doing. And we think that, one of the things that's interesting is when you drive in your own country, you just understand what the other driver is doing. And every single time you drive outside your neighborhood or your country, it's just a mystery what everyone else is trying to indicate. So this is a really treasured video of mine. This is shot by Avi when we did a pilot study in Haifa of the same system. Right here on the far left of this screen, this is David Gerdig, is my PhD student. On the far right is Carmel Zolkov, who's Avi's PhD student. And we have two participants. What we can see on the screen behind David is what the woman on the right sees in her VR glasses. She actually sees a pretty high resolution view, wider field of view than we can see on that screen. You can actually see that because she waves back. And then when people actually finish the interaction, they're surveyed in New York, this would have been in English, both about what happened and how well the interaction at the intersection went. So, I mean, this is just work that we have in progress. We haven't launched on the full-scale version of that research, but I think you can see why information like that could really inform how we design autonomous vehicle technologies for the city, and also just scoping out how this kind of research helps us to think about how we might design futures for the city without actually having to test and implement everything in the city, and also how we can think about how the research that we do in one part of the world might we might be able to think about how we actually translate those results to other places in the world without just assuming that every single place is the same. So with that, I'll just wrap things up.
Thank you. I'm completely fascinated by this. It's never ceased to amaze me that Arizona has become sort of ground zero for deploying autonomous vehicles, and it's like 250 miles from the site of the DARPA Urban Challenge. And essentially it's the same Sunbelt climate, the same Sunbelt street grid. And, for all intents and purposes, it's still a Sunbelt technology. So this is the kind of work that we're going to need in order to have it spread around the world. Our next step is Daphne Levine. Daphne Levine is a PhD candidate in the Faculty of Architecture and Town Planning at the Technion. Daphne is engaged in search of routes to integrate social issues into urban planning by creating models of concrete areas for representing abstract social phenomena. Specifically, her research examines urban redevelopment as an opportunity for social mobility in the lower middle class. Daphne, welcome.
Thank you.
Daphne, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Now it's
Yes?
better. Yeah.
Yeah, and do you see the full screen?
Yes.
Okay. So let me ask you a question. Does anyone here live in a city? Obviously, the answer is yes. For those who do, let me ask you this. Are there any raise and rebuild in your area? If there are Israelis here, the answer is likely to be yes. All of those terms fall under the topic of urban regeneration. My name is Daphne Levine. I am an architect who worked as a director of the strategic planning department of Bat Yam's municipality in Israel. From my position in Bat Yam, I encounter the desire of the people for urban regeneration. Nowadays, I am a PhD candidate in the Technion's Faculty of Architecture and Town Planning under the supervision of Dr. Merav Aaron Gutman. The research I will present today is modeling the social impact of urban regeneration, and it was done in a collaboration with Shai Sussman and Sharon Ailon. Urban regeneration is a very nice title. As part of this process, neighborhoods that for decades were neglected are undergoing massive infrastructure improvements and significant changes to the streets, buildings, businesses, and public areas. But what about its social impact? Most people, include academic researchers, link urban regeneration and gentrification. What does gentrification mean? Gentrification is a term that describes a process in which middle upper class people move to live in disadvantaged neighborhoods in the city's centers. Then they raise the rental prices and push out the weak long-time residents. The assumption here is, if new residents enter, it means someone must leave. If this is the assumption, we would expect that the long-time and low-income residents will not welcome this process. It takes me back a few years ago. One day, as I took this picture, behind the half-open window on the bottom left here, an old woman called me over and over. Hey you. Finally, when I got closer, she asked me, are you from the Raise and Rebuild? When will they come? During my years in Bat Yam, I have heard such questions daily. When will the Raise and Rebuild come to us? The people were not afraid, they desire it. Of course, I was present at the difficulties involved in this ongoing and uncertain process, but also at the will and hope the people hang on it. I wondered how it could be. If the long-time residents are going to fly out, they are supposed to escape from it like wildfire. So why do they still take part in this? I decided to find it out. I was interested to know if gentrification by urban regeneration is a myth, or is it really happening? In other words, my research question was, what will be the demographic changes in an urban area as a result of the urban regeneration projects? To investigate this question, I chose Bat Yam as the research area. When it comes to urban regeneration, we need to look for two things. First, a city or neighborhood with a weakened population. And second, high profit potential from the land. That is precisely what Bat Yam provides us. It is close to Tel Aviv, with high transport accessibility, and has an outstanding beachfront, and it is still a vacant city. Therefore, Bat Yam has been one of the most prominent high-rise construction plans in the country for the last few years. The intention is to replace hundreds of old buildings throughout the city with high-rises and increase the city's population by 50% without increasing its area. These are the reasons why Bat Yam was suitable for my research. Thanks to my familiarity with the municipality, I got free access to their databases, including detailed data on the citywide level. Now that I had a research question and chose my research side and got access to data, my question was, how do I want to research this? What will be my methodology? In my lab group, we decided to produce a simulation to predict the demographic changes. In order to do so, we realized the need to explore three main things of urban regeneration. In the first stage, what will change in buildings themselves? In the second stage, what will be its economic effects? In the third stage, we need to examine the residents asking, how it will influence the ability to stay. At the built environment side, we found 3 typologies of regeneration implemented in cities in Israel. Addition of residential units to an existing building, reconstruction which facilitates demolition of one building and reconstruction of one building instead, and raise and rebuild in a larger scale. For each of them, we determined the change it generates at the building's level. The parameters we considered included number of units, average unit size, number of floors. On the economic side, we defined the monthly cost of a new apartment, the monthly cost of rent, building maintenance fees, and city taxes compared to the old apartments. For example, while the apartment area increases, the property tax payment is getting higher. Or if I need to finance now 4 elevators in the building instead of no elevator at all, because my new building now has 100 apartments instead of 20, then the maintenance fee is getting much higher. Finally, we turn to a parameterization of the socioeconomic profile of the residents, including form of ownership, own or rent, age group under or above 65, income level, high, medium, or low income, and seniority, which here means the number of years living in the apartment. So we have 3 stages, and we are working within a simulation. Now we ask, how much money do you need to earn to stay in your apartment after the regeneration? In other words, if we consider a reasonable percentage of their income for housing, how much do people need to earn? We put all the data in the simulation and see who will withstand the economic changes, who will not, and who's supposed to be the newcomers. I want to show you now the dashboard of the simulation. It is too small to understand, and I will not get into the data now. Instead, in a moment, we will analyze the graph. Here, I want to emphasize the combination of the visual with the results. On the left side, we can see the map and the 3-dimensional model. On the right, the data related to the socioeconomic situation impact of the urban regeneration process. The urban planning and the social content usually appear separately and in different set of tools. Our platform incorporates them. Now let me take you to the results data. So what did we get? First, the simulation reveals a clear trend of low-income households leave the neighborhood. This is the blue. So far, we are in line with the popular scholars' opinion about displacement. At the same time, the results shed light on 2 crucial, yet still under-researched issues related to the social impact of urban regeneration. First, the findings indicate that most, about 80% of middle and low middle income original households can remain in their apartments if they are the homeowners. And second, the simulation results indicate that only population groups belonging to the top 2 deciles in the big red on the right will be able to purchase or rent an apartment in the new projects. This sounds strange. If the city grows by 50%, then almost a third of Bat Yam will be populated by only the top 2 deciles. Something sounds illogical to us. If you are in the top 2 deciles, I'm not sure you will go to live in Bat Yam. Sociologically, this is very important. Although the discussion of gentrification focuses on the long-time residents, in urban regeneration, the number of new tenants is several times greater and has a magnificent impact on the city. So we decided to go down to the field and see what happens. We took buildings that are already occupied, here it is B, and wanted to see the connection between reality and the simulation, A here. What did we find out? We found that the residents' social-economic cross-section was not so high. Instead, it encompassed middle-income households. The simulation shows us that a high wage is required to live in the new apartments. However, on the actual ground, residents do not meet these wages. How could it happen? How can we explain this gap? According to the income index, it does not make sense. We think it can say 3 things. Or the residents are taking on higher commitments than they can. Or they are working in the black market. or this gap should be understood in the territory of inheritances, financial investments, and real estate ownership. All of them remain hidden in the social research about urban regeneration, but probably drive the housing market. Further research is needed here. However, there is also a bright side, the upgrade of the middle class. As we saw most, about 80% of the middle class homeowners survived urban regeneration and upgraded themselves. They changed their economic situation. What does it mean? That until now they had an old apartment in a collapsible building without an elevator. Now they have a new apartment with a security room and elevator in a tower with a strong population coming in. The education systems will probably be upgraded, and so other things the higher deciles will bring with them. Urban regeneration has allowed people who had no other way to get on the path of the upgrade of social mobility. I am asking to conclude by saying we are living in a world that is all undergoing very significant urban changes. It is not enough to build, but we need to build responsibly. The model presented here stands to play a role in the planning discourse and the work of policymakers. It enables to look both at the dark side of the Black economy and the commitments that people will not be able to meet, but also at the bright side, at the good news of the social upgrade of the middle class and low middle class. These two sides need to be explored in further research. However, this study found that the spotlight, both for the long-time residents and the newcomers, should be placed on the middle class. This does not necessarily correspond to the perception of gentrification, and this is an important identification. I will end here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daphne. That was fascinating. So our last panelist is also our conference organizer, and I will reintroduce Sharon Ailon, who's a postdoctoral associate at Cornell Tech, developing visualizations and simulations to achieve social impact in planning. Currently, she's been focusing on mapping New York City social distancing stories and the demographic changes resulting from privatization processes. Her PhD explored the linkage between urbanism and art and the manner in which local identity, spatial injustice, and social exclusion are forged or deconstructed by artistic activity in cities, which, you should all know, was awarded the President of Israel's Grant for Scientific Excellence and Innovation. Okay, Sharon, it's yours.
Wow, thank you, Anthony, for the nice introduction. I'm gonna...
Sharon, we see your presentation in a representation mode. You need to make it like a full screen. Yeah,
now?
Thank you, great.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna start with a full disclosure. Before coming to Roosevelt Island, I worked with Daphne on the Bat Yam case study. And together we walked the neighborhood, talked to the residents, and developed the basic assumptions for the simulation. And this is us standing in front of the building that is about to be rebuilt in Bat Yam. And then we've developed this collaboration with Wendy, and this project that I'm presenting here is the result of a collaboration between Merav and Wendy from both of the institutions. So this is also a great opportunity to thank both of you. So our intention here was to test the scalability of the simulation by observing the same urban phenomena, urban regeneration, but in a different location. So obviously we took our simulation from Bat Yam to New York. Not that obvious maybe, but we thought it's cool because there's a very important TV show in Israel that is called Bat Yam, New York. And this is the inspiration. But of course, this is a completely different location. And as Anthony mentioned before, in my PhD, I focused on art and urban regeneration and its connection to gentrification. And during this time, I got acquainted to the local community fear of being displaced. This led me to focus on displacement in my postdoc, this time using advanced technology to try to give shape and visualize this abstract social phenomena. And so Roosevelt Island is indeed a very different location. Why did we choose it, you wonder? Well, similarly to Bat Yam, it is very close to the urban core, located in the East River adjacent to Manhattan Upper East Side. Like Bat Yam, it has a high transport accessibility, a great riverfront, and similar number of residents. And similarly, there are a lot of real estate speculation on its future, in this case, due to the development of Cornell Tech campus. Or so we thought when we just started. In addition, there was, of course, the issue of me living on the island, being able to conduct a real ethnographic research by becoming a part of the community and sharing the everyday life. And in the image, you can see my son standing in line, social distancing, before we even knew that there's such a thing like a mask. And the thing is with ethnographic research is that it can highlight things that you can't even imagine. And when I started my ethnographic research, I've discovered a very different story from the story of Bat Yam. I've learned that the real drama here is the privatization or the expiration of affordable housing programs, and that the fear of displacement is related not to a massive change in the built environment, but rather to a quiet process of privatization that can't even be seen. But nonetheless, its social effect might be as dramatic as those raise and rebuild projects. And I especially love this image as it encapsulates the story of the island. On the right, you can see the red bus of the island. It's a part of the ideal community development experimental master plan. And on the left here, you can see the luxury apartments, real estate ads that were part of the second market-led stage of the island. And inside the bus, there's another real estate ad describing Roosevelt Island as Manhattan best kept secret. So let us go back in history, and this is us going back in history, and understand what does Manhattan best kept secret really means. For many years, Roosevelt Island was the island nobody knows, extremely inaccessible to the public, home for public health institutions. In 1969, commissioned by the city, Philip Johnson and John Borghi, who were inspired by the Garden City movement, suggested an idealistic master plan, the cover of which we can see here in the image. Its development as a residential neighborhood was part of a short community development phase in the US, with an aim of building a mixed race, mixed income community. Its first stage was publicly funded in 1976 with the 4 buildings of the Wire over here in the middle, including more than 2,000 affordable units with tenant protected under Mitchell-Lama housing program and Section 8 vouchers. Those things I know mean a lot to people in New York, but less to people in Israel, but we don't have time to explain them here, I'm sorry. And 2 decades later, the rest of the buildings were developed through various private-public partnership with between 20 to 40 affordable units. And later on, of course, we have Cornell Tech campus. And the thing with affordable housing, specifically the Mitchell-Lama program, is that they have an expiration date. Mostly it's 30 years. And in parallel to the new development, beginning in 2006, Each of the 4 wire buildings has had its own plan of exiting the Mitchell program, and the units are gradually being converted to market rate. This privatization process is Manhattan's best kept secret. And if you are smart enough, that's the right time to buy those apartments, but please don't go talk to your real estate broker just yet, because we are just now reaching the main part of this lecture about the simulation itself. So based on Bat Yam case study, we took the same simulation and adapted it to understand what will be the demographic changes in an urban area as a result of the expiration of affordability plan. What will be the the socioeconomic profile of the households that will be able to stay in their homes after privatization, the profile of those who will be forced to leave, and the profile of the newcomers, or like Daphna was asking, who will come, who will stay, and who will leave. Unlike Bat Yam, we didn't have access to data. So the simulation combines data from various data sources to create synthetic agents and statistically assign them to building. It was written by Shai Zosman, a very talented master student who is expecting his firstborn, therefore he cannot present with us today, but we couldn't have done him without Shai. And like in Bat Yam, the simulation combines information about the built environment, about economic parameters, and the residents. The scenarios check how will changes in the built environment and the economic parameters influence the residents' ability to stay in their apartments. In it, changes in the environment trigger decision-making by the agent. For example, the privatization of Roosevelt Landing in 2006 is a change in the built environment. The agent, meaning the household that live in Roosevelt Island, need to make a decision, and they can make this decision based on those criteria of age, life expectancy, income, and so forth. They can choose between 5 or 6 options. They can choose to buy in, buy out, stay as protected tenants, move out, move in, or die. As the simulation progressed, we also took into consideration increase in maintenance fees, in utilities fees. And if then questioning creates interaction between the agents and the environment. For example, if the rent is more than 30% of the household income, and if maintenance fees and utilities fees exceed 8% of the household income, then the agent will choose to move out. This is, of course, a very simplified example of the simulation, and we can go to it in more details later. But what did we get? The simulation produced interactive timelines that follow the conversion rate from affordable units here in blue and market rate units in the red line. The sunburst pies that you can see here show us the expected demographic change. By clicking on every every year, you can get a socioeconomic profile of the tenants at that time. In this case, when we click the link, we can see the dashboard, which is similar. I don't know if you can see it. Maybe now, can you see my dashboard? So similar to Bat Yam, we have here an interactive graph that can be rolled back in history and show us the different times, and it is also updated in the map and in 3D. For the sake of the presentation, I will not go into depth here, but continue with the less interactive presentation to kind of walk you through the story of the island, through the story of the simulation. So to better understand this, let's see the simulation in the island scale. For example, one marks the development of the affordable units in 1976 with 4 different income levels and different age group. As you can see here, the middle section shows us the number of affordable house. The middle part, the blue part, is age groups, and the outer circle is the income level. And we can see the diversity here. 2 and 3 marks the second phase of development, and we can start to see that the changes demographic charts below as the inner circle become red with younger age groups and higher income levels. And we can also see the red graph going up until it reaches its tipping point, which is number 4, an important point at the moment at which there are equal number of affordable units to market rate units. And you can see that the affordable units still include at this time diversity of income levels and age groups with a gradually aging population, and that the market rate apartments are occupied by middle to upper income households from the younger age groups. 5 is our validation point in 2020. This is where we compare our simulation to the census data and to other data sources to make sure that it progresses in a logical line. And 6 and 7 produce a glimpse into the future, showing us that by 2040, 70% of the units on the island will be converted to market rate and 80% by 2060. Observing them all together, we show a process of change from a diversity of age groups and income levels to high income levels. The age group remains somewhat diverse, but while the majority of market rate apartments are occupied by younger households, age 18 to 65, the majority of affordable units are of households over 65. In simple words, we've learned that the residents of the market rate units are gradually becoming younger and wealthier, whereas the residents of the affordable units are growing older and poorer. This trend is, of course, expected. The skeptical might even say, why do you need a simulation to tell us what we already know? This is how gentrification works. But the simulation does much more than that, and it can tell us much more than that. So the power of the simulation is the ability to move from scale to scale and to show us results at the neighborhood scale, as I've just shown you, but it can also go deeper into the housing project scale, as we can see here. And this shows us the information about the wire buildings, and it can go down to the building level. For example, Roosevelt Landing, the first building that was privatized in 2006, we can see that upon expiration, in this case 30 years after 2006, 75 of the units will be converted to 75%, of the units will be converted to market rate with younger age groups and upper income barracks. The alarming issue, or the alarming thing here, is that upon expiration there will still be 35% protected tenants in the building. Those are the people that are at risk of being displaced. 70% of them are over the age of 65 and 20% are over 85. 14% of them will be of low income. The simulation outcomes are forecasted for, similar outcomes are forecasted for the other buildings as well, showing that despite an individual agreement for each building, the demographic changes will be somewhat similar. This means that the simulation can show who are the households that are at risk of being displaced. It can show us their socioeconomic profile, and it can pinpoint the tipping point, the point at which displacement pressures are starting to accumulate. And it visualizes it in a way that many people can understand. I must highlight that our simulation merely scratches the surface of affordable housing complexity, and that it has many limitations. But nonetheless, it serves as a proof of concept that this kind of simulation is needed and plausible. We believe that once a more advanced version of this simulation in the scale of the city as a whole can be used as an urban management tool, it can help predict demographic changes. It can help balance the interplay between gentrification and displacement, and it can help produce policies that protect weaker social groups. And at the hand of the residents, it can also give them information about the future to better prepare and protect themselves. So to finalize, I just want to say that this research highlights privatization as a force that quietly and gradually endangers massive social change. In contrast to the urban renewal project of the 60s or to Bat Yam raise and rebuild case study, it is not a new structure that emerges out of the ruins, but rather a new social structure. Using this kind of simulation in the scale of the city can show that the cumulative demographic change of privatization processes might be as dramatic as those of the urban renewal project of the 60s. And of course, we can't dismiss the importance of the private market in creating housing projects in the city. But the challenge of cities today is to find the right balance between the market and the need to protect weaker population. In the case of Roosevelt Island, the challenge is to protect its vulnerable residents that are part of the island since the days nobody knew it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thanks to all four of our panelists for sharing their work. Let's open it up now for discussion and questions. If you have any questions, feel free to send them into the chat room. We'll start with a question from Carol Martins, which is for Harold. He asks about examples of augmented reality that can enhance equity in the city beyond support for people with various impairments.
Yeah, that's a great question. So one obvious thing is, so AR shines when placing virtual content and it needs to be spatially registered. So if you think about AR as the next step in remote collaboration, where you can kind of as a step towards telepresence, you could see that for telemedicine using AR, you can reduce cost. You can have fewer visits to the hospital by providing the next step over video conferencing. The same goes for maintenance and training. So one of the main application areas for AR has been manufacturing and this remote expert scenario where you have a remote expert guiding the user in the field for operating complex machinery, for example. How this is better than a regular, let's say, a video call is that the annotations and the information coming from the remote expert can be spatially registered, for example, on a particular button or on a particular body part and using the tracking information. So I guess to answer your questions, this could reduce cost for telemedicine, reduce cost for maintenance of machinery and training of people.
Yeah, I was curious when you listed the set of skills that you're teaching, and what might be necessary to think about preparing students to do XR in urban settings. Whether there was some need for thinking about either interaction, not necessarily just between people and devices, but between small groups of individuals who are either interacting with each other with these augmentations, filtering that, as well as like the larger kind of environmental design considerations that say like urban designers and architects might deal with. So things like how these technologies interact with the way people navigate and wayfind and signage, other kinds of things like that. Because I know one of the issues that's come up when I talk to urban designers about this technology is, what does it mean, that everyone essentially is going to have a different view of public space with different information and different annotations. And it's kind of an extension of that whole filter bubble problem. I just wonder how we might approach that, tying together those two bodies of knowledge.
Yeah, I think I did mention that when you put together a syllabus like that, you could have add a certain weight to an application area. And this sounds like something that should be done with like domain experts like yourself, finding that intersection between kind of the core modules in a course, and then how that could be integrated with these specific issues for urban tech. What is also interesting is how this kind of technology could actually create a feedback loop into the design of built environments. Is there a need for the TV room in our apartments going forward if we're all just putting on a headset when we come back home? Can we make apartments with lower ceilings because we'll be seeing rendered environment and fake skyboxes and so on? So I'm sure like 200 years ago, architects or engineers were not thinking about where to place a 65-inch TV, and we might be seeing some kind of similar developments going forward.
There was a question for Jennifer Minner had a question, which is scrolled off my screen, for Sharon and Daphne. Have you been able to incorporate multiple policy intervention scenarios into the simulations?
Daphne, you want to take that?
Yeah, scenarios, I think it's our next step. What we did in the simulation, it's like a photo of the business as usual scenario. This is what will happen if all the plan of all the raise and rebuild and the other typologies that plan today will happen in the future. But if we think about other options or other scenarios, we need to make the simulation more complex, and I think this is now our goal.
Right. Ideally, if it will be a planning tool, the idea for a planner to be able to plan with it. So to check, if I plan this much project at this time, I can have these results in the population or the demography. So scenarios are definitely part of that. And I also think that there's an interesting connection between our example that is checking cultural differences in the same urban phenomena to Wendy's project with driving in different places. So maybe we can have like an interesting conversation about how the location changes the planning system or the research that you're doing. Like Wendy, for example, I know that you have a very interesting observation about differences between Israel or Tel Aviv to driving in New York.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to sound shocking, to any of our Israeli colleagues, but actually so far it looks like the Israeli drivers are less aggressive and more careful drivers than the New York drivers.
That's because you were checking students in the Technion, not real drivers.
But, I think one thing is that when we have people doing these experiments, we actually have to take into account that there are a lot of, built-in differences in our environment that actually shape the way that we drive, everything from like how far apart the lanes are spaced, how long the red, green lights go, and many other things. And so when we craft the virtual environment, we're actually trying to craft it's actually a space that doesn't exist, we're in particular trying to be attuned to things that people are really aware of, like lane widths and signage, and do things so people will still behave as naturally as possible, but that we're able to give people who are in totally different continents a similar scenario so that we can actually compare their driving performance. And so, for example, no one in the US or Israel that we did pilot testing on noticed anything about the curb heights. But if you change the curb heights, people from Germany are like, that's not a normal curb, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And another example is that like we have these four-way stop scenarios, and then this is when a lot of people realize in Israel they actually don't do four-way stops. They have traffic circles, so they can avoid that kind of thing. And so that's not a situation they people would normally encounter on a well-designed roadway. And so there's just like a lot of these things that we have to design around. And so similarly, I think like when you try to make a comparison between like Bat Yam and New York, it's like you both want to be able to look at the things that are really specific, but then also figure out how you can generalize, and it's tough. But I think it's also really interesting to see what are things that are generalizable models that you might be able to apply to other places in which things are very specific and what reasons those things are specific.
Right.
Anthony, can I comment?
Please jump in.
Thank you. First, I want to say how happy I am to listen Harold and Wendy that I missed a lot, and to be so proud in Daphne and Sharon work. But I want to challenge ourselves and maybe to ask whether we can bring together Harold and Wendy, your kind of contribution, together with Sharon and Daphne. For example, in the next session, Batel Ravid Yosef will present our lab, our new lab, and present her work about digital twin, which is like a 3D modeling of the city. And how, moving from the Viz lab to my new lab, I decided not to embrace any 3D technologies like the Holo or Oculus or other device, mainly because the Viz lab teach me that we have to enable people to communicate between themselves and not to isolate them, because planning is about discussion. So we create a 3D experience thanks to architecture, because we screen on a round wall, because we have like very unique kinds of screens, of projectors, etc. So we are dealing with the issue of old people, and we had a tour together with the welfare department in the municipality of Haifa, which they want to show us how many people, old people, live in a poor condition in the backyards of the building. And it was very shocking tour. And then we returned to the lab and we discussed the option that 3D modeling enable us to, because it has volume, it's about volume, right? It enables us to analysis the bright side and the dark side of the city, to represent and analyze the building, but at the same time, all the contemporary buildings in the yards. So the thing that I want to put as a challenge is that we have to ask ourselves, to push ourselves, how this technology of 3D, and all the amazing things that you show, how it really creates new content, how it's really affect our sociological understandings of city.
I'm just going to jump in. This isn't work we've shown, but Sharon and I wrote this really great proposal that did not get funded, unfortunately, to have people go around in that Roosevelt Island bus with VR goggles and be able to see where the water level would be if we had, like a 20-year, 30-year, 100-year flood, which we have on more regular intervals than at 20, 30, 100 years now because of the climate change. And I think that kind of thing where you can give a lot of people a visualization of something that we can often see in these very clean, not not scary looking models, but like really envision that in our environment, I think will be really effective at creating community, awareness and conversations in a way that we wouldn't otherwise have, So I mean, I think that's kind of where I think there might be some really nice overlap between this kind of modeling work that's being done and the more experiential work that Harold and I are doing. But I'm also really excited to like look for other possible projects in that space. I think there's a lot of things that are possible that would be fun to do.
Yeah, I think this the intersection of urban tech and XR is fascinating. I'm on a thesis committee with one of Jenny Sabin's students up in Ithaca, and it's early days still, but just some of the topics that I've been learning about is something called human building interaction. So there's a very niche area there. And so much opportunity for experimentation in terms of simulating how we can interact with environments, how the environment could react to our actions as well. So yeah, I'm as I said, I'm an amateur in terms of urban tech, but I think it's one of the more interesting application areas for my technology, XR.
Anthony, I have something to say. Just something that I'm just thinking. I just sharing you with my thoughts. Maybe when I came to the academy, I came from the practice, and the thing that I realized that the academy theory in Israel is related to the Western academy. And this is the reason the terms of gentrification and displacement are used in Israel. But for our results or for our simulation and from my opinion, they are not fit to the local situation. And what I start to think that maybe now with technologies and the data, we can do things that more detailed and more based on tools that we can start to compare places, things that we couldn't do before decades. So maybe it can help us to get the locals in a I don't know, in global technologies, something like that.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, it hadn't occurred to me before, but there's probably almost infinite variety of like neighborhood housing and demographic transformation processes that happen in cities around the world, and we lump them all together under this one category that emerged from a handful of, I don't even know how much scholarly work there was behind it in the US in the 60s and 70s. And we describe every neighborhood transition process, with the same set of baggage. Yet we have the data, and now we have tools for modeling those transitions in much more nuanced ways, and develop much more kind of fine-grained language for describing it. Are there other comments and ideas? We've got about 5 more minutes before our session wraps, and I know the people in Israel could probably use another break.
I want to take this opportunity to insist on a meeting. I will be more than happy to host everybody, Wendy, of course, Harold, in our new lab, and maybe to I don't know, to exchange some idea and to experience the new facilities and the space. And maybe I see that Sharon Shachaf want to say something.
I do. I just saw that.
Maybe one sentence.
Yeah, I was just, oh, go ahead. I was just going to write. I'm tempted to comment, but I'm even more tempted to let everybody have a break.
No, I just want to say that I'm really surprised that all during the day, a lot of people speak about their experience with their students and raise the question of teaching. How you put it on the stage, but everybody speak about student, and really there was a very surprising focus on community engagement kinds of courses. And I think maybe, and I didn't thought about it before, maybe it can be kind of a chapter in our edit book, speaking about technology and urban tech and sociology. And maybe it's kind of the statement that emerged from our conference, that we cannot do it as a researcher in academia without working together with our students and with the communities around us.
Nice.
Sharon Schaff, did you want to make a
Yeah,
comment?
I'll just make a quick comment. First of all, you guys, I am taking this all in. I am a global media scholar. So, I think this could be useful to you all because, I'm a lay person, but I really, Daphne, Levine, I really wanted to just tell you a couple of sentences. First of all, I really appreciated how you were able to, I really got where the research was and where it was going. And so I think you did a really fantastic job. But so while I'm not in your area, I did sit on many PhD committees and they were all global and comparative. So also Wendy, what you were saying about, if we make it work in Pittsburgh, I was, trying to tear my hairs out. Right, sure, you can. So I really see those same tensions being teased out. And what I wanted to tell you is that quickly is that I really would love you to zoom in on this moment where you have the square peg and round hole, the theory that you're trained on from the United States models, not working with your case studies. This is a great gap, a great friction, and the beginning of theory building that can really shift. And this is, I wanted to highlight this because these are the kind of conversations that I hope to facilitate and have you guys, have tomorrow. What are those frictions that, where are the models, are not consistent with observations that you do, because you guys are diverse, you are in many different locations. And with that, I will bow out, but I really enjoyed this panel and it spoke to me, although I'm in a totally different field, scholarly speaking. So thank you.
Thank you. That was a wonderful way to wrap up. Any last words before we take a much needed break?
Right. So, yeah, let's take a break. Thank you for all of those who stayed with us so late in the night in Israel and throughout this fascinating day. I hope that we will see you again in half an hour, that you will not fall asleep, because we have the most interesting panel. We saved it for the last with decision making environments. That should be really interesting. So see you soon.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.